Good morning, everyone. Speaker for today's Tech Talk session is Sayuri Jayasooriya, and she will be speaking on requirement analysis. Over to Sayuri.
Thank you, Tina. So I think requirement analysis is very much important for all of us because requirement analysis is the initial step for everyone when we are initiating a project. So let's get into why we need a proper requirement analysis. So the basic goal to us to have a proper requirement analysis is to fully understand the user requirements and also to remove inconsistencies, incompleteness, and anomalies of the requirements. So we'll go one by one as to why we need to remove these. So when we are talking about removing inconsistencies, some requirements contradict the others. So for example, we have navigation issues and pop-up messages that are not inconsistent within the app. For example, if the user clicks on the back button, the user expects to navigate to the immediate previous screen, but instead the user is taken to the very first screen of the workflow. So some scenarios this happen and some scenarios it doesn't happen. So this is an inconsistency. So we need to make sure that it's not happening in the requirement analysis when we gather the requirements, and also when we are gathering the requirements has to be complete. That is because some requirements are omitted due to the oversight, that we go roughly upon a workflow. For example, let's say we have a requirement to report a user. So we don't go in length to say what will happen to that user when he's got reported. Would he be suspended, or would there be an admin panel to check his, monitor his activity? So we need to go in length as to what will happen to that reported user. It should not limit to just that requirement. And also anomalies. Anomalies happen because there are several interpretations possible for just one requirement. For example, there might be requirements saying when the user is close to the expiry date of something, a banner has to be shown to the user. So we don't know exactly how close this is. So it can be 1 day close, 2 days close, or maybe once. That's where the anomaly comes in there. So we have to make sure that we don't have anomalies when we are preparing the requirements. And last but not least, we have to prepare a document so that we can refer to the document when we go ahead in the process, when we go ahead in the project. So when we are conducting a requirement analysis, we have 5 steps. So there might be some other steps as well, but I've documented only 5 steps. So the first step is the feasibility study. So we can do this feasibility study through information assessment, information collection, and report writing. So when we are doing information assessment, collection, and report writing, we need to answer some questions. Questions like, what if the system wasn't implemented and how would that be different? And what are the current problems with the existing system and how they will be addressed in the new system that we are proposing? And will there be any integration challenges? For example, there might be some existing systems that are integrated to the old system that we are working on. So we need to make sure that we are not challenged in the integration when we are implementing a new system. And also, we really need to know that the new system, the newly proposed system is really necessary for that scenario, for that solution. Because maybe we can fine tune the old system and then we can use it so that we can cut down the cost, cut down the time, cut down the scope, cut down everything. So if we can fine tune the old system, there's no need for us to implement a new system. So we need to make sure that it is really needed there. And also the timeline. So sometimes it's urgent for the client to implement the new system, but from our side, we can't actually have that implemented because lack of the resources, we don't have the availability. So we need to make sure that we are on the same page in the timeline. So once we have answered these questions, we have answered these questions as well. Is the project worthwhile? Is the project contributes to the organizational objectives? Are we using the current technology? Is it within the budget, its integration, and its timeline? So we'll go to the second step, that is requirement discovery. So it talks about application domain, the services that the system should provide, and the systems operational constraints. So it involves almost all the stakeholders, that is end users, managers and engineers. And we have multi-perspective analysis in here. This is because requirements can be classified under different viewpoints, that's providers and receivers. So when we are gathering the requirements, when we are discovering the requirements, it is really necessary for us to discover the requirements in every perspective. So in multi-perspective analysis, we have three perspectives: interactive, indirect and domain. So we'll go one by one. So interactive means you directly interact with the system. Indirect, as the name suggests, you don't directly interact with the system, but you can influence the requirements. Domain is where the project is related to that domain. So for example, if we take for an example, we'll take healthcare system. So in a healthcare system, we have patients, hospitals and caregivers as interactive viewpoints because they are directly related to the functions that is given with the application. Indirect viewpoints, we can say doctors and family members, because doctors, they know what are the medications, what are the health data, what are the activities, symptoms and everything. And family members, they know what is to be generated in a report, what is to be generated in a graph, such as. And in a domain viewpoint, that is the healthcare domain that we are talking about. So if we go to the third step, we come here after we have a sketch in front of us. We have a sketch of requirements in front of us. It's brown because now we know what are the requirements. Now we have to identify what are those requirements. So these requirements can be categorized into two types: user requirements and system requirements. User requirements are the services that the system is expected to deliver and the constraints under which it should operate. And system requirements are basically the system function. And one main important point is that we should consider is when the system requirements are implemented, it should always achieve at least one user requirement. So let's get into an example. So we have a user requirement to save the contacts, and the constraint under which it should operate is that you should be a premium user to save the contact. And so when we talk about system requirements, the system requirement for that is that you can add manually, or you can scan the business card in order to add the contact number or the contact of the related person. So if we go into the third point that we discussed, that the system requirements, when implemented the system requirements, at least one user requirement has to be achieved. So system requirement we discussed was that we can add the contact manually or scan the business card. So the related user requirement is that we have to save the contact. So I think we can get into the same page that through this system requirement, the user requirement is achieved. So the fourth step, that is objective of the requirement. The requirements are categorized on the objective of the requirement in this phase, in this step. So that functional requirements and non-functional requirements. Functional requirements are basically the main functions of the system, and non-functional requirements are constraints on the functions, and they are more likely to be critical, such as time constraints, because when we need real-time processing, time constraints are more critical than the actual functional requirements. So I wanted to talk about a little bit more on non-functional requirements. So we'll talk about a little in here. So usability, it is how easy it is to use the application for a user. And we have portability, that is how portable it is. We talk about hardware, operating systems, browsers and other applications. Reliability, it is basically the dependability. How often does the system experience critical failures? And also another important factor is performance, how fast the system can return results. Security, how well the data is protected against the malicious users. So these are some non-functional requirements. There are so much more, but these are some highlights. So when we come into the fifth step, and that is the final step, that is writing the requirements, there are some guidelines that we should consider when we are writing the requirements. That is that when we are writing the requirements, it should be readable, because we are aiming to give this document to technical people as well as to non-technical people. So we should use natural language, should not use computer jargon, and also we should use language in a consistent way. That is like, for example, if we are saying about mandatory requirements, we can use shall, will, or if we are talking about desirable requirements, we can say may, might, could, so that we have a separation between mandatory requirements and desirable requirements. And also there are two problems that we face when we talk about when we are using natural language, that is ambiguity and over flexibility. Ambiguity we discussed earlier, because we can interpret in various ways. If we give an example for ambiguity, we can say manage your contacts, but all it does is you save the contact and leave the contact. But manage, it just gives you another interpretation maybe. So it can be interpreted in various individuals in various ways. Over flexibility is that you can tell something in various ways. Like you can say what you want to do is you manage a journal, but you can say manage type of journals. Like if you say type A, type B, type C, instead of saying managing journals, you can say you are managing journal type A. So that is the over flexibility of using the natural language. So we should avoid these two as long as we can. So if we are talking about the summary, we talked about requirement discovery. So that sums up the feasibility study, and it gathers information about the proposed and existing systems from documentations, system stakeholders, and specifications of similar systems, and through observing existing systems and studying existing procedures. And if we go to requirement validation, we have to validate certain aspects in order to make sure that we have gathered the certain requirements. So verifiability is that we should be able to make sure that the requirement can be tested, because if not, it is not realistic. So something we can't test, we can't actually keep it as a requirement. Comprehensibility is that we should make sure that we don't have any more clarifications. Everything is understood and everything is complete. Adaptability is that it is the ability to change with the new environments. If the existing systems change in the future, will it make a huge impact in changing our requirements. Validity is that we should make sure that our objectives of the requirement aligns with the objectives of the project and objectives of the organization as well. Consistency, we talked about it, that everything has to be consistent. It should not contradict with each other. Completeness, again, we talked about it, that everything has to be complete. But in here, we always talk about the completeness of the overall requirement analysis, like have we gathered all the requirements that we need. Realism is that all the requirements can be achieved by given resources, because we need to make sure that our resources are available as well. So when we talk about requirement classification, these requirements are based on the system design. So this appears when the project is initiated. So we can actually classify into 4: mutable, emergent, consequential, and compatibility requirements. So mutual requirements are when the environment changes. For example, if one organization that is a huge factor in the project tries to leave the project, then you need to make sure that your requirements change accordingly. And emerging requirements are when the user feels, when the usability experience of the usage increases, then you can include more and more features for your application. So then the requirements increase and enhance the requirements. And consequential requirements are because of one particular requirement, you have to add another requirement. For example, we have reminders in our application, and because of the reminders, we have to include push notifications for mobiles as well. So that's a requirement because we have a requirement of having reminders. Compatibility requirements are basically the dependencies with the existing systems. Once the existing system changes, we have to change the requirements of the new system as well. So requirement documentation, this is the structure of the SRS document. This addresses all sorts of requirements, the usage specificity and the objective specificity. So the high-level requirements are signed off by the key stakeholders, that is the high-level picture. Low-level requirements are signed off by the system users, that are user functionalities. So the SRS document, that is this, is signed off by the project manager and the project owner or the project client. So this is also referred to as the business requirement definition document, but the business requirement definition document is more focused on functional requirements and user requirements, but SRS and the business requirement definition document, they have the same objective, but they are different in scope. That's the end of the presentation. If you have any questions, you can.
All right, seems like no questions. So thank you, Sayuri, for that knowledge adding session. So thank you everyone for taking part. Have a nice day.
Thank you.